All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Bruner, and I am the Exotic Forest Pest Educator with Purdue University's Department of Entomology. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about one of our least favorite, but probably most well-known invasive pests, the emerald ash borer. It's been here for quite a long time now in Indiana, and it's done quite a bit of damage. But it's always good to double check where we currently stand with this, because unlike what a lot of folks believe, emerald ash borer is here to stay, and we will continue to get problems with it. So why don't we look a little closer at this? So emerald ash borer was originally detected in the United States itself in about 2002. First originally believed to have been brought here on solid wood packing material. It arrived in Indiana in 2004. We originally erected several kinds of quarantines, but unfortunately those didn't prevent the insect from spreading across the entire states. As we stand right now in 2023, emerald ash borer has been detected in all 92 counties in Indiana. Now, this insect does have one good thing about it in that it specializes in attacking ash trees, which means that yes, unfortunately, it has done significant damage to the population of ash in our state, but it seems to be primarily limited to the ash population. Naturally, this brings up the question, do we still need to worry about this insect? A lot of folks will say, well, all the ash trees are dead, right? Well, that's actually not that true, and I want to go a little deeper into this to give you an idea why. So a little more background information. How did it get here? This is one of the questions that I receive very, very commonly with a lot of our pests. And this story is one of the earliest ones. So this insect arrived here. It is native to portions of Russia, northern Japan, or northern China, Japan, and Korea. So much like many of our other invasive insects, it is from Asia. It was never seen in North America prior to 2002, so it's pretty easy to trace its presence here from shipping across the globe. And like I said earlier, we believe it to have been brought here in solid wood packing materials. And you can find a lot of quarantines in the past and current that are designed to prevent this. Now, that being said, this insect is still sweeping across the United States. Some of my colleagues in Oregon have only recently discovered it attacking ash trees in their native forests, and they are unfortunately dealing with what we in Indiana were forced to deal with about 15 years, or more than 15 years ago now. Now, before I really dive into what we need to be worrying about right now, I like to give refreshers on what this insect is, what its life cycle is, so that way we are all working from the same starting spot. So let's talk a little bit about EAB's life cycle. So emerald ash borer can survive for usually one season. Most trees will only support them for that much. Their life cycles just aren't really built for 2 generations or more than that. Though you can see that EAB can survive for more than one season if they are in a really healthy host with good temperatures and the right kinds of condition. Right now, that is kind of hit or miss, so I think it's just best to assume for the moment that EAB is surviving for one season. The adults, they are feeding, though they will not live for very long. They will consume leaves of ash trees, while the larvae are going to consume the cambium tissue underneath the bark of the tree. And for those of you who don't know, that's the tissue that supports the nutrient and water transport for the tree itself. So effectively, its circulatory system. Now, as for the speed at which it spreads, natural spread of emerald ash borer is only about half a mile per year. So that would beg the question, how have they been able to spread so wildly? Much like with a lot of our invasive pests, the answer is very easy. It has spread due to human activity. We transported it, we carry it in firewood, we have it on our vehicles, and other wood products that we might move around. This is why you've seen campaigns throughout the years that say, don't move the firewood. And folks, this has grown no less important, especially with some of the newer invaders that we're now dealing with, like spotted lanternfly. So a little bit more on EAB's life cycle. Why don't we just go through this handy chart here from Wisconsin. The adults are usually found essentially starting about a month ago and will carry on until mid-September, depending on temperature. This is where the natural spread is only going to be half a mile. That's because the adults will only fly so far, searching for hosts and searching for oviposition substrate. The eggs the adults lay, a single female, like it says here, can lay between 100 to 200 eggs, and they will do so in the cracks between the bark of the ash tree, and I have a picture I'm going to show you in a moment that kind of demonstrates that. They also, it should be noted, can be moved by moving firewood. Remember, those eggs are being laid in the bark of the tree, so if that tree gets cut down and you use that for firewood, you're also transporting those eggs and potentially the larvae along with it. The larvae are going to hatch and they will go ahead and chew through the cambial layer just underneath the bark, and they're going to spend about 1 to 2 years eating and growing. And you will know because the S-shaped galleries they create will start off very, very thin and very, very small, and they will slowly get larger, indicating the life cycle passing for this insect as it grows and grows to bigger larvae. Eventually, they're going to chew out a pupal chamber where they will go ahead and pupate just underneath the bark, and then eventually exit through a D-shaped hole, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about before. Now, those D-shaped holes, they're only really going to be present May through September, as the adults are emerging, but of course the holes are permanent, so if you're finding new ones, that's when you're going to find them. It should also be noted that even though the larvae can live for 1 to 2 years, the adults will only survive for about 2, maybe even 3 weeks. Really, they're just there to eat enough to have the energy to be able to reproduce, and then they will die. Pupation, like it says here, happens in the spring. So that's why we see the adults come out about mid-May, because they've finished their pupation cycle. And of course, they will overwinter as eggs, as larvae within the tree itself. So it's important to know your life stages, and this picture actually kind of talks a little bit about that, because what you're looking at here is a female emerald ash borer laying eggs in the crack of an ash tree and right between the bark layers. So let's talk about the adults a little bit. So the adults, like you've seen pictures of already, they are small, brightly iridescent green. I've heard many comments that talk about the adults looking like jewelry. And I even know some folks, some artists who will go ahead and use them in jewelry. They are exceptionally hard beetles. I've had the chance to work with them and pin them, and they are very challenging to pin. Their body, their exoskeleton is very, very strong. But they are small. They're only going to be about the size of a cooked grain of rice. Now, unlike other tree pests like aphids or the spotted lanternfly that you heard me talk about, or cicadas, they actually are equipped with chewing mouth parts. Thus, those adults are going to go after leaves and chew their way through that. They're not going to try to poke them into the tree somehow. Usually, we can tell in some insect species the difference between males and females due to coloring or size, but in this case, sexual dimorphism does not exist between the two sexes, other than just the actual reproductive organs themselves. So telling the difference between them would probably take some dissection to be able to know. Now, the larval stage, this is the business end. This is where all the bad stuff tends to happen. The larvae are unusual compared to other grubs that you may have experience with in your yard. These have an unusual shape. Their appearance will be a lot different. You're going to see larvae that are pale or beige in color, kind of matching the color of the wood that they're consuming. And they can reach about 1 inch to 1 1/4 inch when they're fully grown larvae before they go ahead and pupate. The larvae will live their entire lives within the cambium tissue of that tree, creating those S-shaped galleries. They are not intended to see sun. They do have some unusual shapes like I described, so if I go back to the previous image, you can see their segments really stand out. They're kind of flared, but also look at the head end of the insect, how it's kind of bulbous. They have a lot of muscle packed in there. They are meant for chewing through wood, so that's what their bodies are primarily formed to do. So they will eventually go ahead and dig out pupation chambers, so that way they can go ahead and complete their life cycle and create a chrysalis. Now, about that and the eggs themselves, there's only so much we can say here. So let's just start with the eggs. Here we have this female who's ovipositing those eggs. What you're seeing there is her version of her reproductive organs, her ovipositor. This is an organ that will extend outwards and go to whatever substrate the female needs, and the eggs will come out of that. The eggs are going to be laid in those bark crevices, like I've said, and what this does is when they hatch, it gives the larvae easy access to the food substrate that they're looking for. They're going to hatch within 7 to 10 days, so they will not be long. They will go ahead, lay them, and a week later you will have active larvae. But that will be based on temperature and other environmental conditions. The warmer it is, the faster they hatch. The eggs are very small. You will not notice them unless you are specifically looking for them, and even then, you kind of need to be trained to know what you're looking for. I've been working with emerald ash borer for a long time now. I've had opportunities to study them when I was both at undergrad and as a professional. And even I cannot reliably identify the eggs without a lot of work. So I would rely on finding larvae or adults before that. The pupa of these insects, the chrysalis or cocoon as you've heard it probably called in other ways, these are the larvae preparing to move into their adult stage of life. So what they'll do is they'll dig out a pupal chamber to metamorphose in. Unlike something with, say, a butterfly, whose chrysalis is often this kind of funny cocoon-looking thing that doesn't much resemble the insect at all, this pupa is what's referred to as exarate or exposed. You'll be able to see the adult form underneath it. And it's actually rather fascinating to watch if it weren't such a nasty insect. The pupa is unmoving and it is non-feeding, so that means it is going to be still. That's why they want that pupal chamber to be safe in. The pupation is going to take about 1 to 2 weeks in the spring, so not very long at all. And again, it's based on temperature. The warmer it is, the faster they will pupate. So we talked about the insect. Let's go over now the actual impacts that we get to see on ash trees. And you can see here from the image in front of you that it can have quite a deleterious effect on these trees. We don't see very obvious holes or anything in the tree, but look at that bark. That bark is cracked. The tree is become brittle. It's effectively, its own weight is ripping itself apart. That's the impact that emerald ash borer has on an ash tree and why they've managed to extirpate a lot of ash populations throughout the state. Now, larval feeding, like I've said, is going to result in tunneling through cambium tissue, cutting off the tree's vascular system. Imagine if someone cut holes in your circulatory system. You will not be able to survive that very well. You'd need a lot of surgery to be able to recover. In the case of trees, often they don't recover. If you see limb loss and canopy loss due to emerald ash borer, those limbs are dead. They will not come back to life. So this is why it's so important to be very careful about your ash and to observe them closely. And since the insect renders the ash tree extremely brittle in more severe infestations, the tree really needs to come down at that point because then it becomes a safety hazard. So here are just a few examples of what that damage looks like. There are 3 different images here. All of them are showing that tunneling in through the cambium tissue underneath the bark. What's fascinating is if you look at that image all the way on the right side, that's where the bark has been completely stripped away by hand to kind of demonstrate what's going on underneath. And you can't even see the wood for all the tunnels. Obviously, this tree, it is not going to survive. This tree is dead and it needs to come down. So this leads us, of course, to the next subject of, okay, here's all the damage. How do I make my treatment symptoms? There are a few ways to go ahead and make that judgment. And this is why I'm showing you these pictures right now. Because what you're seeing are pictures of ash trees who have different levels of canopy loss. And that canopy loss is what we're going to use to make our decisions on this. Now, the image in front of you now was originally, I received this image from Dr. Clip Sadoff, who is by far and away an expert on emerald ash borer. He's worked with it throughout decades of his career. So one of the things in this image is that it's showing is the idea of a certain percentage loss will tell you what kind of management decision you need to make. So let's start with the less than 10% loss. So what you have here is an ash tree. It has less than 10% of its leaves gone. Not too many limbs are dead. This is a tree that is in great condition. This is a tree that can be saved. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and you invest in this tree. You go ahead and you plan maybe injection treatment or something else to help it out. Now, as for the next tree though, this is when you're getting into a condition where there's more than 10% loss, but less than 30%. You're seeing some dead limbs now. You're seeing that the tree is losing photosynthetic capacity because it's losing leaves. This tree is in a lot of trouble. You can still save it. There is a rescue strategy. but you have to accept that it's going to be damaged and it's going to need a lot more work than a tree that has a lot less canopy loss. And then if we move to our greater than 30% canopy loss, then that tree is gone. There is nothing you can do to save that one because all of those dead limbs, they are dead. They will never leaf out again. They need to be removed, and most likely the tree itself has become exceptionally brittle due to the infestation. So that tree is going to come down. You don't want to invest in trying to save it. Then you need to make a decision on how you're going to bring it down safely. So just to summarize what I was talking about here, if a tree has greater than 70% canopy, you can be saved. That tree can be managed with proper treatment and scheduling and working with professionals. But if you go beyond that 30% canopy loss, you're looking at a lot of limbs being lost, you're looking at a lot of photosynthetic capacity lost, and you're looking at the tree becoming more brittle. So there is no rescue strategy at that point. Now, what do we use to try to save these trees? This is another question that we get very often, and I've heard all kinds of answers on this one. So this is a table that was put together again by Dr. Sadoff, kind of demonstrating the efficacy of different treatment options that exist. Now, one of the things that I want to say here starting out, I am not a fan of telling people to apply this or apply that. My idea personally is that you need to get professional help when you are treating your ash trees. There are a lot of reasons behind that, involving timing, involving the toxicity of different treatments and the ways that you can avoid causing damage to your local environment. You need a professional to do this who is trained to do it. So first off, starting with imidacloprid, this is probably one of the few that you would be able to get from a retail outfit. Usually in the form of something like a soil drench. This is one that you can apply, and it is a systemic insecticide. Everything below that, dinotefran, emectitin benzoate, and azadirachtin, those are all essentially, you need a professional to help you, either because the chemicals are restricted use, or it's very, very picky on how you apply them and get any kind of efficacy out of it. So what this shows is just part of the reason behind that is because not all applications are going to be made in the same way. If you're looking at something like imidacloprid, again, it's a soil drench or it comes in granular. Again, it's probably one of the few that you can get as a retail. But dinotefran is a soil drench or bark spray, and its application timing is extremely important in order for it to be effective, which is why you need a professional to help you do this. Do not attempt to use other dinotefran products without them being labeled for ash tree or emerald ash borer, because the formulation could be different and you could end up doing more damage than you want to. Emamectin benzoate is something that is injected, and you have to have a professional because it is a restricted use chemical. And azadirachtin, is again another injection. Anything that's injected, I would say you need professional help with unless you are the professional yourself, because that means you're intentionally wounding the tree. You are drilling into it with an injection system, so you probably have a business that does this. Like I say here, professional help is required for a lot of these. I would not attempt it on your own. And also something else to consider is that the label is the law when it comes to these chemicals. And oftentimes getting a professional who is trained in what that label is and how to use it is just going to be best for you and what you want out of that process. So let's go over now some common questions. So Dr. Sadoff and I recently published an article in the Purdue Landscape Report that addressed a couple of these questions, and I kind of want to go over them here. So the first one being, why do we keep getting infestations of emerald ash borer? If you look around, you see very, very few living ash, so naturally you'd ask yourself, well, all the ash trees are dead. Why are we still worried about this insect that attacks ash? Well, first off, not all the ash trees are dead. Emerald ash borer doesn't really infest tree saplings. They want to go for trees that have a bit more diameter than just a simple sapling. So those younger trees continue to develop. We get repopulation, we get resupply of ash trees, and they grow enough before they get infestation. And then, of course, the emerald ash borer does come out. When the trees are big enough, they'll infest. And the trees that get infested take between 6 to 10 years to die, if they actually die from a heavy enough infestation. In that time period, they could potentially reproduce. They might have enough energy to reseed, so those ash tree populations are resupplying. Not like they used to, certainly. but they're surviving enough, which means that emerald ash borer is also surviving and it is here to stay. So this is why it's so important. This kind of leads us to our next question. Is it worth it to continue treating my trees? You've been treating your trees for 10 years now or what have you, and you want to know, am I just wasting my money or am I still protecting my trees? So there was a thought experiment that Dr. Sadal posed of consider the cost of removal versus treatment. Potential removal costs could be upwards of $3,600, he's theorized between $1,800 and $3,600 to remove a brittle ash tree after it's been damaged enough. Compare that now to the cost of about $300 every 3 years if the cost of a pesticide application is about $10 per diameter inch of the tree itself. Obviously, you want to keep your tree if you can, so then the cost really kind of balances out. You probably are saving some money just by treating it. And of course, there's the associated risk of just having a brittle tree. We're not kidding around when we talk about how brittle these trees are. I've seen ash trees in some areas in the area that I live in that I'm pretty sure I could push over myself. And we're talking trees that look like they're about 30 feet high. So there is a definite danger associated with them. This is why it's so important to protect our trees in this situation. So there's also a 10-year study that Dr. Sadal conducted in Indianapolis where they treated trees with ivermectin benzoate, and they did applications over that 10 years, but they did it twice in 2013 and 2016. And they noted that the protection stayed stable in the tree until about 2019, and then damage started becoming visible from emerald ash borer. By the time it reached 2022, the trees were damaged enough to become a safety hazard and had to be removed. Well, what this is saying here is that with that every 3-year treatment, the trees stayed safe until the next set of 3 years passed, and then all of a sudden, the protection was wearing off and the tree was getting attacked again. So it shows that yes, continuing to treat your trees is very, very valid. And also, if you stop treating your trees, then you are definitely inviting in a lot of risk. So let's go over, just very briefly, some good practices for prevention. And this is actually fairly simple because it's not changed too much. The thing that we have to understand is that after 20 years of infestation, emerald ash borer is now endemic to Indiana. It's a part of our ecosystem and we will not get rid of it, which is why it's so important that we consider prevention. Prevention is simple. Do not move firewood. Firewood is one of the easiest ways to transport a lot of invasive species, and as challenging as it is to not move firewood, we are asking everybody to please burn it where you find it if you can. Obviously, there are going to be moments where you need to move firewood around. I would counsel people to not move firewood very far from where you find it at all. Even though all of our county quarantines were lifted in 2016, because all 92 counties are now infested, I personally stick to the idea that burning it within the county I'm finding it in is going to be the best idea. In that way, you're also not going to help the spread of insects like spotted lanternfly. So what started 15 years ago with that Do Not Move Firewood campaign is still very, very true, and I, for one, am going to keep harping on it, and probably until I'm blue in the face. Some other things that we can do to help prevent the spread is consider treatment scheduling for those trees that can be saved. Talk to your local arborist, talk to your local forester, or even an extension educator within your county. Have them take a look at your trees and maybe make a few calls on whether or not you feel like this tree can be saved using that guide to the canopy loss. Infestation is going to be inevitable, unfortunately, but with a good treatment schedule, you can reduce those live populations of insects and then derive ongoing benefits for just a cost of maybe $300 every 3 years. Now, not all pesticides are going to work the same way. Not all treatments will work the same way. For example, the azadirachtin that I was talking about will reduce the fecundity of the insect, so it will reproduce less often. Whereas other one, like ivermectin benzoate, it'll be lethal to insect populations. So to summarize, yes, please keep treating your trees if you already are, and if you aren't yet, you need to consider it. The benefits are long-term, but they do need to be maintained. So if you've already been treating your trees, good on you. Keep going. That's the best way to do it. But we do have to understand that emerald ash borer is here to stay. Now, with that, I do want to thank Dr. Sadoff for all the information that came from this, and Dr. John Obermeyer. Most of the images you saw in here were taken by Dr. Obermeyer and his skill with a camera. I also want to thank Elizabeth Barnes, my predecessor, and Carrie Tauscher, who helped put together a lot of the information that I just shared with you. And with that, I just want to say, if you see something, say something. If you see an invasive like spotted lanternfly pictured here or something else, please feel free to report it by calling 1-866-NO-EXOTIC, or you can email me. My contact information is right in front of you, as well as information on our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Consider reading the Purdue Landscape Report or even attending a web session of the Emerald Ash Borer University. All right, with that, I want to thank everybody for their time, and I will see you at the next one.